Breathwork. It's a skill that's becoming a much more featured tool inside of businesses and day-to-day life to help us manage employee well-being as well as how we cope. But what makes breathwork effective? What is breathwork, and does this all sound a bit woo-woo to you? I've got Nick with me today. Nick is from the 3E Space Limited, holistic wellness and coaching company. He helps individuals, teams, and organizations build person-centered toolboxes that cultivate the emotional agility to ebb and flow through life. Welcome to Impact Your Evolution, Nick. I want to know a little bit more about you first and how you got into breath work, because I know the backstory, because me and Nick do know each other. If you have listened to me on this in the past, you might have heard me refer to being on local radio. Nick is actually one of the people that sit by me on a pretty much a weekly basis on the radio. But I know a little bit about your backstory. I know that you were in a sport previously, which I'll let you speak about. But I want to know what brought you into being a breathwork coach, being in the holistic space.
Well, first of all, Andy, thanks for inviting me on the podcast. And yeah, you're quite right. We've got to know each other a little bit as men on the radio and more recently outside of it as well. So I'm really pleased to be here and to have this conversation with you. God, how did I get to where I am today? If you'd have asked me for most of my adult life about anything holistic, it would have felt so far away from me as a man, very woo-woo, very left field out there. And I discounted it as something that I could benefit from for most of my adult life. At the same time, though I've had a number of successes in a number of different areas in my life as an adult, I also struggled for most of my adult life. And the sporting background that you refer to was between the ages of 10 and 19. Back in the late 80s and 90s, I was on a career pathway to become a professional footballer. So that formed a big part of my identity growing up through puberty, adolescence, and as a young man. So that arena doesn't particularly lend itself naturally, especially in the 80s and 90s, to holistic modalities and that way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. So that's a very short synopsis.
It's very much an area that kind of boxes off. It actually kind of gives you that stigma of not to speak about these kinds of things, not to really think about health and wellness outside of what you're taught in, say, a professional sport. I again, not from a professional standpoint, but I have come through very much a sporting background, a health background as well. And being sort of an 80s child, growing up 90s and into the early 2000s, the people that you surround yourself with, it was kind of generalized as to you don't talk, you don't do this holistic thing. Anything that was kind of woo-woo was kind of deemed a bit hippie-ish. And if you didn't fall into that way of life, then it wasn't really for you. But even my understanding over the last probably say 10, 15 years, and I've got my reasons as to why I do pay attention to these things now. And this is why I wanted you on the podcast as well, because I know how much being more mindful and being more center focused has helped me move forwards. Yeah. What got you into coming away from the professional sports side of things into the holistic side of things, and how you use this breath work in this day?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think coming out of football was part choice and part fate for me. I think I was burnt out, to be honest, as a young man, and I didn't really have the skills to understand and process my emotions or to move forward within my life, because everything that I'd come to know about myself was tied up with the sport. So I then enter my 20s, not really knowing who I am, what I want to be, and I struggled because of that. The path eventually, when I asked for help, that I went down was the path that many people go down, which was very kind of GP orientated, clinical health model. I suffered from quite high levels of anxiety and periods of crippling depression, and I didn't really understand why. It was only jump forward 15, 20 years when I'm getting to my mid and late 30s, having gone through the process of things like CBT and person-centered talking therapy, which kind of I now describe as loosening me up a bit. It got me a little bit prepped for something different, but it didn't really give me the answers I needed in order to move forward. And I think that was because what was really missing was still that sense of self and that sense of identity. So when I learned that actually all of this holistic stuff isn't all the way over there, miles away from where I am, and actually it's really accessible things began to change. So, as an example, for me, suffering with anxiety, I spent so much time trying to think my way out of it or to distract myself from it, either through exercise or other less healthy ways of being, um, to deflect from what was going on. Breath work for me allows you, it's completely accessible and it allows you to meet you where you're at. So it's much more
Hmm.
experiential, and that way it's much
Right.
more personal. And I think that for me is the difference. So I'm not looking for answers outside of myself anymore. I'm looking for answers within myself.
Right. So this is something that I'd actually love for you to be able to explain. So I'm going to take this as though I'm a listener listening to us having this conversation around somebody that uses breath work in their day-to-day life and how it helps them manage. Now, we're fortunate that this is actually Mental Health Awareness Week as well.
Yes.
And somebody that also does struggle with anxiety, and I have been through very serious bouts of depression, which is, what I was battling through my mental health, let's say, journey, which still continues to this day. I fully appreciate how impactful breath work can be, because I don't know much about it. I know enough about it to know that it can massively help me control how I'm physically feeling in a moment and how I'm responding to something. It also can help me understand how I'm physically feeling. It gives me that time to be able to separate from mentally what I'm trying to work out and the physical element of how I'm responding to something.
Mm.
But I'm not a breathwork coach. And if I was a listener listening to this, I'd be saying, but surely, like, just breathing, I do that anyway. How can that physically help me? Like, how is changing the way that I'm going to breathe going to do anything for me? So, if I was a listener, what would you say to somebody that has this idea that breath work is just me breathing anyway?
Well, I'd say that you couldn't be more wrong, first of all. Yes, it's true that we all breathe. It's a fundamental of life. But I think breath work for me is a bit. Everybody understands what sport is, for example, but sport isn't actually a thing. Sport is something which is a term that we all understand, made up of completely different disciplines that can sit under
Yeah.
support. Now, for me, breath work is very similar in as much as there are different ways of harnessing the breath, different timings, different ways of using the nose and the mouth, of using the chest or using the diaphragm and the belly to work with our experiences. And when I talk about working with our experiences, I'm talking about our inner experiences, and specifically, I'm talking about our emotional experience. And for me,
Right.
anxiety is born from our stress response, which we all have. It's something that we've
Yeah.
carried since the beginning of time. And we need it. It serves us. It stops us walking across the motorway trying to get from A to B. It keeps us
Yeah.
safe. But it's also quite unsophisticated. And in a busy modern world, it can be easy to get overwhelmed by all of the things that we have to think and feel and behave in, whether it's work, whether it's our personal relationships. It's a busy old life we've got. And this system, which serves us well, I think because of some of the experiences we have or how we treat ourselves, we never think about, well, how do I breathe? And we can
Mm.
actually, when we think about stress, we tend to think about the things outside of ourselves causing us to feel stress. Oh, I've got an awful boss, or I've got so much on my plate with the kids and the mortgage and all of this other stuff. And all of that's true. But at the same time, what tends to happen when we're in our stress response is that we go up to our chest and we start to breathe into our chest. And we
Yeah.
don't know we're doing it. And part of the reason why we do that is because we want to oxygenate the lungs to be prepared to potentially run away or fight. That's like a response that's automatic and it's built within us. So for me, through practice, what I've learned is that to support me with feelings of anxiety, I can begin to go inwards and work with the experience of anxiety by saying, where am I breathing right now? Oh, I'm breathing up here. What am I feeling? I can really feel my heartbeat. What are my thoughts saying to me? My thoughts are saying to me that I'm in danger. Now, when that experience was at its worst for me, I literally thought I was about to have a heart attack.
Yeah. That's the same experience I had as well.
It's very common, very, very common. So I think being able to get to know yourself at that deepest level takes time, takes work, and there isn't a one size fits all approach. People have anxieties for different reasons. They have different backgrounds, different experiences. But just by, for example, going from your chest and beginning to really use that diaphragm and breathe into your belly, to breathe in through your nose and concentrate on being as present as you can with that, and coming out of your head and into the practice of breathing, letting it go
Yep.
slowly and elongating the breath out the mouth, is a really simple, accessible way to meet you where you're at. And it's amazing what happens if you allow yourself the privilege to do that, admittedly over a period of time, and crucially practice it when you're not in it. So it's not just a firefighting tool when you're feeling anxiety, but make it part of your daily practice. Like, bring it, if you're going to go to the gym, do 30 seconds or a minute of breathing at the beginning and the end of it. You're adding nothing to the session really in terms of time, but you're training yourself to behave in a different way, just like you train yourself in the gym to become adept at using the equipment. That's the way I look at it, as one
That's a
example.
valid point to make, to be fair. So again, somebody that I am aware of breath work. I'm aware of how it can be used. I've done some of the Wim Hof stuff in the past, which is quite extreme, and I wouldn't advise many, in fact, most people to start with that type of breathing
No.
practice. But I was aware that it was what it was. But what you said there with regards to not using it as a firefighting tool,
Mm.
that there for me stood out straight away, because the thing I do, I go back to doing just controlled breathing. So deep in, exhale, deep in, exhale, when I need to separate myself from what's causing me current stress and anxiety. So it's usually I'll find myself sat in the car taking a minute, maybe after a training session, or maybe just driving around places, and I kind of get that minute to myself where it's a quick 30 seconds a minute, couple of big deep breaths in, slow on the out, and it's just really control and bring myself back down to where I am. But I use that as a firefighting tool, and it never dawned on me to make it like an everyday practice. And I did wonder. So this is going to be an observation of you, Nick, from me knowing you. But I did wonder, like, you are an extremely kind of calm and mellow person to be around, and you pick up on that just being in your presence. And I'm fortunate to be able to say that I've been in a room and sat next to you on many occasions now to be able to feel this. But do you think that, like, having breath work in your day-to-day life, and I've seen, and if anybody does want to follow Nick, Nick Edgar Coaching, I believe the handle on Instagram is at. If
Yeah.
you watch Nick's stories, you'll see Nick do regular breath work practices, especially with his partner Jess as well, and they share what they're doing, etc. And you do like weekend home rituals and things, don't you, with regards to bringing yourself back down and grounding yourself, centering yourself, and those kinds of things. This has been something that's prompted me to be able to say, I'm seeing Nick do this, and I know Nick as an individual, and he's calm, he's collected, you feel like you're very together when you're in your presence. And I must say that for me is something that I feel I have been good at that in the past, but with focusing on business and focusing on the future of what I want to be able to build, it slips. Like, I slip, and we all slip at times. Just reminding myself to not use breath work as a firefighting tool and to bring it into an everyday practice. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn out process, does it?
No, and this is the beauty. Again, if you think about the image of something like breathwork or any one of a number of other holistic modalities, it's easy to kind of think, things like hippie, forest, nature, all that kind of stuff, and it can feel woo-woo and just not for you, because of our own prejudices, really.
Mm.
But I think for me, and by the way, it's something I just want to say to pick up on what you're talking about. If you were listening to this and you've known me throughout my 20s or 30s, you definitely wouldn't say Nick has a calming presence all of the time. And do you know what I mean? You would see
Yeah.
someone that maybe worked with him in any one of a number of corporate jobs or worked for him and would say, yeah, I remember that side of Nick, but I also remember a side of Nick emotionally exploding and not being able to work with his emotions. So I really want to get that in there and be honest about the road that I'm on. I have worked hard to try and work with my emotional experiences to be able to give myself a better chance of responding to high emotional moments rather than reacting to them, and boy, did I spend a lot of years reacting to them.
Do you get a lot back personally from knowing that you have that sense of self-control when you're in, because you obviously you're using breath work as a form of, it is a, I guess it is a control, it's a way of controlling our response to fear and stress and anxiety and all of the other inducing feelings that we get time to time. But you must be able to get something back physically, not just in the moment of using breathwork, but just knowing that an element of control that's probably much more superior to, say, medications and other different resorting to, say, intoxication of certain substances and those kinds of things, like all of these other ways that other people tend to kind of like lean to in life. You
Yeah.
have this thing that's clean, it's accessible, it's controlled by you. You must feel a sense of huge reward by being able to, let's say, master this process.
Yeah, and again, I'm still learning it every day, and I'm having to practice it. And if my own practice drops off, it's amazing how old habits can come back really quickly, like most things. But yeah, absolutely. But I think it's only through trying those more traditional methods, including medication, to try. It always felt like I was trying to climb on top of it, keep it at bay, rather than actually accept it and work with it. And there's something about that, bringing that more compassionate approach to, I'm accepting that this is how I'm feeling. And now I'm going to take ownership and responsibility of that and work with it. And I'm going to empower myself, which is one of the three E's, to actually learn to make it work for me in those moments in terms of how I interact with the world. That is not to say that I have beaten anxiety or I've smashed it out of the park. Like, I still feel it. It's just that there's a knowing that comes alongside that now, that I know and trust through practice, that I can begin to work with it and get different outcomes for myself.
One of the things I would say, and especially if there's anybody that is listening to this now in the future, whenever wherever you come across and stumble across this episode, is I am a person that has been on an entire carrier bag full of, or grocery bag if we're talking, internationally, uh, of medication a month to help control and support all of the mental health struggles that I was going through. And I know what it feels like to feel disconnected from reality by being on so many medications that were controlling my everyday experience. And I wouldn't say I was making the choice consciously to pay attention to how I was breathing or breath work. I kind of stumbled across how I was breathing with regards to trying to use a form of meditation
Mm.
just to really help me control how I was physically feeling. Now, again, I think the similarity in what we have is, you mentioned about anxiety and depression and how that was like it's a stress response, etc. That is the only response my body knows, is it goes into extreme bouts of anxiety
Mm.
at something that is fearful, stressful, whatever, you name it. And anxiety is the first thing that gets triggered with me. And then that onset creates a panic attack.
Yes.
So kind of like combining all of that together, meditation for me was, it kind of opened the door on how it allowed me to use myself, what I was in control of and what I had access to without having to use medications and those kinds of things, to just be more self-aware of the actual dangers that I was in, because I wasn't physically in any dangers. It was all a mental, let's say a mental reality rather than the physical reality that I was experiencing. And by going through, let's say, low level understanding of meditation, it was just listening to things that was guided meditation, etc. I felt a much more sense of self-control, which then made me aware that my breathing technique was playing a huge part on how I was feeling come the end of maybe 5 or 10 minutes of just paying attention to where I'm physically at. And by knowing that, it's allowed me to be confident with how I controlled medications in the past. It's allowed me to be medication free. And I'm not saying exactly what you said there. I haven't beaten anxiety. I haven't beaten panic disorder. I haven't beaten any of the mental health things that we battle day to day, anybody that struggles with mental health. But what it has given me is the confidence in myself to say every now and again, life is busy. Life is stressful. I am dealing with X, Y, and Z right now. And this 5 minutes that I've just given myself just to breathe calmly in control of what I'm currently doing is giving me the mental capacity to be able to process where I'm currently at right now and what it is that I'm actually really experiencing and reframe then why I'm experiencing it the way that I am.
Yeah, I love that. What you've just described so beautifully then, I would summarize as developing emotional agility. That's how I
I
understand
didn't even know it.
it.
Didn't
Yeah,
even know it.
because it is, because what you're doing is you're working in a way that's meaningful to you with your emotional experience holistically. So you're working with the body as well as the mind to be able to make sense of your experience to move yourself towards a more favorable outcome. And that
Mm,
for me is the essence of what emotional agility is. Whereas, whether it's if it's meditation and mindfulness that's opened the doorway for you, then that's brilliant. It really is. And I think, and this is what I always say to anyone that I work with or talk to, there's no right way to do this stuff, but there's always a right way for you. And that's the most empowering thing about it, because you get to decide what that is,
mm.
and I
I
think,
think, go on, I won't interrupt. Carry on.
no, it's fine. And I think you mentioned earlier, when you go down this rabbit hole and it ceases to be something that you're afraid of or that you feel is miles away from you and you realize it's really accessible, you can really start to play around with it. And you mentioned earlier of Wim Hof and conscious connected breathing. And that for me is like the gold standard of real transformational shifts using breathwork.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, just sort of touching on, I think a lot of people hear different, like you say, modalities of how you can use different forms of wellness and holistic and awareness
Mm.
to help you understand, control, manage, and just kind of maybe even get through just day to day. But when you can when you can zoom out a little bit, and this is just, again, personal experience using from what I know, and I've got somebody that sits in an area of health that I'm aware of, but I'm no expert. I've never taken enough time to focus just solely in the area of being holistic, which hats off to anybody that has, because it's a world that it kind of has its own view, and
Yeah.
it forms something that I think is very, very misunderstood as well today, because you say holistic and you instantly go to, well, that's, it's mushrooms in a field, and it's like being out off your head for 24 hours and experiencing something. It's
Yeah.
not that at all. And I think when you can figure out that holistic or wellness or being mindful, these words that are floating around in our society right now in 2024, you look at businesses and how they're looking at, what am I doing to support the employees, and what are we providing that's going to give them access to X, Y, or Z that's going to help them cope when maybe we're not around to support their needs. That might be something that lies in the holistic world, where it is helping them create something of an understanding of how to control anxiety, stress, reduce these scenarios outside of the workplace environment, so that when they are showing up, they're showing up as a better version of themselves because they feel they have regained that sense of self control.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that begins, so the work we do within organizations really begins by fostering an environment of vulnerability and shared experience. Now, me and you connected, one of the reasons we connected as well as we have done is because we were both willing to meet each other in a vulnerable space and share our experience. How common is it in a workplace culture for people to do that? It's something which is becoming more common now, but we're still learning how to do it. And I think when you share vulnerably and it doesn't get reciprocated, it's a really tricky feeling to sit with. And you feel vulnerable then in the truest sense of the word, and exposed, and it can be disconnecting. So I think for me, when creating that environment where it's possible to meet everybody in that space is really important. But then there's something about how we show up in our stress response, which I've become increasingly fascinated in. So we spoke about the physical experience of anxiety, but we haven't spoken too much about, well, why did I have these levels of anxiety, and
Mm-hmm.
how did I used to show up? So for me, I showed up as a people pleaser, and for me, I showed up as a people pleaser, and I understand because it was born from that time in football where my sense of self was as a footballer. So when that was gone, I didn't know who I was, but I was trained to behave in certain ways, and I took that learning into all the other environments I went into. So in work environments, when I was stressed, especially, I became the people pleaser. I looked and became what I thought people needed me to be. Now, in some ways, that's a skill, and it can be really connecting and work for you. However, if you become, let's phrase it as the yes person at work, and you're constantly going out of your way for other people to support the overall well-being of the team, for example, or your organization, boy, you're going to increase your chances of hitting burnout and more of these anxiety experiences. So the paradox for me with people pleasing is I would feel a temporary relief at being of service to someone and feel like a sense of self worth for doing that. But then I would get overworked and feel more stressed and more anxious because of that strategy. So there are other kind of characters, masks, other ways that we choose to show up when we're in stress. So work environments that are very busy, one of the things, if we've created that vulnerable atmosphere for people to open up, is who do you become in those moments? And you might find that you've got a team of people pleasers, or maybe you've got a team of intellectualizers, or maybe you've got a team of finger pointers, or maybe you've got a team of victims. And I think it's really when we characterize these things and separate ourself and our identity and who we intrinsically are from some of the ways we can behave if we allow worry and anxiety and pressure to hit us subconsciously and untapped, I think we can work with those experiences much more and with each other's and actually grow then as a unit of people. And that for me is really powerful.
So we've touched on vulnerability a couple of times, and I know obviously having to be able to, not say having, I'm going to reframe that, being able and getting to do the work for yourself, on yourself, to help you in whatever capacity you feel you need that support in life. It opens that door of vulnerability. Now, we have met and had numerous conversations where I can guarantee 15, 20 years ago, if I'd have been with people around me and said, Nick, I've been experiencing X, Y, or Z recently, and it was a very like vulnerable, emotionally open conversation. It wouldn't have allowed, I would not have felt confident and not comfortable at all, just simply because of the stigma of day to day, how we're potentially educated or as well as told growing up with society and the people that surround us that we're not to be expressive in this type of way. But when you are, and this is something that I've personally experienced, is that when you are expressive in those ways and you do allow yourself to be, vulnerability, I would say, isn't a weakness. You have to be ridiculously strong as a person to be open and vulnerable in any circumstance, to really be able to understand where you're currently at. And if you can do that and it's reciprocated as well, the conversation and connection is it's on a different plane. It really is. You don't just exist. I feel like a lot of, like you've mentioned a few times, like people wearing masks and how you show up. The corporate world, business, I think even social media these days, like there are so many people presenting themselves that aren't actually being physically present. They're not themselves. You wouldn't have even known this person if you walk past them down the street and they weren't this personality that they were in this environment where they have to perform, let's say.
Yes.
But being able to do that vulnerable work for yourself is not a weakness. So if you ever hear the fact, and this is for the listener that's listening, if you ever hear somebody say that breath work, holistic, wellness, mindfulness is all hippie and woo-woo, there is a strength beyond what you can comprehend right now that it will give you, regardless of how you physically see what those words mean in society right now, because I can guarantee in 10 years' time, these will be common practices in everybody's day-to-day life that will change the way that they are managing themselves and their health moving forwards.
Absolutely. And by the way, that mindset that you were just talking about there, for me, is a mask. In today's world, if you are, I don't think anybody authentically says the things that you were just saying then about holistic practices genuinely. I don't believe that comes from a genuine, authentic, self, heart-led spiritual space, whatever word is meaningful to you, I think it's a mask. I think it's a mask to say, I don't feel comfortable talking about this, so I'm gonna dismiss it. And actually, I used to be one of those men, especially in my 20s. So
Mm.
I get it. And I think this is why I love having conversations like this and meeting people like you, Andy, because in many ways we're the trailblazers, as well as the countless people that have come before us. And I agree with you that there will be many, 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 many more that come after. Because some of the work we're doing in schools, we're doing and working with teachers so they can work with the kids in the classroom with some of these experiences. So they're going to grow up knowing about breath work. So I agree with you. I
Mm.
think the normalization of what are currently considered holistic practices are really just, for me, a relearning and a re-bringing into the mainstream things which human beings have been doing for thousands of years.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think the way health is shaping up probably in the next 10 years, there's going to have to be changes regardless because of how NHS and everything is these days and how we are mindful of managing ourselves. But I
Yeah.
think with the presence of things like social media and how polarizing it can be, how infectious it can be in creating versions of people that they're not the realities that they really live. So they lose their own identity in their own process of building this fabricated world.
Yes.
I think there's going to be a huge disconnect when the generation that's coming up now, I think, get like what you said there. If they're taught this in schools at an early age, it should hopefully, fingers crossed, and I'm putting this out there for the universe or wherever to say they want to do whatever they want to do with it, but it gives the individual the insight and understanding that masks do not need to be worn for it to be seen as accepted by somebody else. And
Yeah.
I think being completely and totally understanding of who you are and not of being afraid to share openly, vulnerably, whatever method you get to at that point, whether it be through breath work, mindfulness, meditation, health and wellness, whatever it is, you will gain much more out of a life experience and you'll probably go 10 times further in life too by just being understanding of who you are and being authentic as yourself at that point.
And there's my biggest tip, if you want to tune in to whether that is happening for you or not, is, and we all have this self awareness, whether we choose to accept it or not. If how you're feeling in here and in here is different to how you're behaving out there in a really marked way, that for me is the first flag to look at to give you an opportunity to bridge that gap. Because we're never
So
necessarily going to be.
that's something I need to do. I mean, that's something I need to do. To be fair, I mean, I think I need to bring myself into this conversation at that point because, again, I find myself as wearing the business person's mask. I find myself wearing the fitness coach's mask and the health benefit business. It's like there's so many different things, and some days I'm just riddled with anxiety, stress. I just feel disconnected, and I actually need time to center back with myself before I even go pursuing whatever it is what I'm supposed to be looking at on that day because I will be operating in a completely different mindset.
Yeah. And energy. And I think people
Yeah.
feel that. And I think if you tune into it, and this is why the self awareness piece is so important for me, Andy, because when you start to feel those disconnects within yourself, it's amazing how much your ability grows to begin to see it in other people, even in the content they put out on social media. Like you can just
Mm.
sense it. And again, sensing into intuition and trusting intuition and making that work for you is a skill just similar to breath work for me. But it can only begin by going inwards rather than looking for that answer outwards, you know? So
Yeah.
I think it's massive. I really do. And I think it's part of who we are and maybe something that we lost along the way in Western society because the emergence of science and quantitative data and things we can prove has kind of given away a little bit of responsibility of what it means to be a human. And for me, that's why the word holistic is really about everything that it means to be human, not just, and that's why personally, I don't even really resonate with the term mental health because that takes me to my head. But if I say
Yeah.
holistic health, I think about mental health, emotional health, physical health, spiritual health, like the whole package. It's just
Yeah, I've actually started reframing it myself personally as mental fitness as well,
yeah,
because it's something that you constantly have to work at, not just you don't do it once, master it, and then issues, problems, emotions, feelings, and everything are dealt with. It's
no.
like anything. If you want to stay in peak performance, you have to keep revisiting the things that got you to peak performance. So, mental health is, I think, something that's recognized globally. But when you look at mental fitness is the flexibility, the durability to be able to say, am I doing the things that I should be doing that make me feel like I'm a better person, I'm performing better, X, Y, Z. So again, I completely get the whole looking at it as holistic health or wellness health, however you want to look at it. So how you're framing it mentally is the thing that's going to help you move forwards, because it's not just one. I think mental health is something that I'm starting to see that as it's either optimal or it's not. You're either in it or you're out of it. You've either got good mental health or bad mental health. There is no kind of process in the description of what mental health is. It's kind of just labeled these days. And I
Yeah,
think if you're going to look at things to progress, it needs to be in a different light.
and I think that's why I'm moving away from that clinical model of here's normal and everything that sits outside of that, including anxiety, depression, other conditions, are seen as something which needs to be cured to bring us back into what's normal. Something you mentioned there when you were using the term mental fitness, I think for me, again, I don't ask necessarily, is my health holistically good or bad anymore? I ask, is it appropriate?
Yeah,
So, for example, if I am under intense pressure, if I've got a number of plates spinning, I don't expect to be at my optimal self. And I give myself the self compassion to reframe what I'm capable of. And I think,
I'm taking that away from this, Nick. I'm stealing that one, because that is something that I pass that off straight away, and I just go, well, if I'm already at 100% and I've got another, 20, 30% worth of stress to try and handle,
yeah,
my instant reaction is, well, you should be handling 130% of the stress then.
yeah,
And it's even out of this question. You shouldn't even be in that situation. So being able to kind of, yeah, that's something that I think I will take away from this conversation, and just along with making sure that breath work is a more of a day-to-day general practice than just using it to fight.
yeah, look, 100%. And I think that's why the people that I work with, whether it's an individual or a team or an organization, it's to tune into that self leadership and co leadership of our experience so that we can make the right decision for us. So I think of life as we're walking along a path where on the one side we've got self compassion, and we need to learn when to tune into that self compassion and reframe what we feel we're capable of. But we also, on the other side, have that self discipline of being able to push through that resistance and reach a level of that we know we're capable of in spite of the challenges that we're facing. And that is forever changing. That's forever changing, often day to day, week to week, time of year for some people. It's variable. So I think again, being as flexible as you can, but not too flexible so you let yourself off the hook, for want of a better expression, and just fall off completely into this kind of acceptability of, well, I'm just going to eat what I like and I'm not going to do any exercise and I'm going to, blah, 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 blah. But at the same time, not going to the other end of extreme of being so hyper vigilant and beating yourself up if you do miss that gym session or you do decide to have a pizza on a Friday night. Do you know what I mean? Everyone's balance is different and it's changeable. And the more honest you can be with yourself about what you need in any given moment through that self-awareness, through walking that path and having all of those tools available, I think that for me is what optimal performance is. It's being able to be honest with yourself and be the leader of your own life.
Love that. Absolutely love that. Nick, first of all, thank you for gracing me on Impact Your Revolution podcast, just with everything that you've provided today. It's, it's, I was coming into this conversation today thinking, I want to be able to try and open a door for people to understand what holistic looks like, what breath work looks like. I'm going to ask, before I go into the final question, I'm going to ask one thing. If somebody was to say, right, I don't want to label this as holistic. I don't want to label this as breathwork. I don't even want it to be labeled as anything. But what Andy and Nick have been talking about today has kind of left me thinking, I can do something with 30 seconds, a minute that I've got that's going to make me feel a little bit better. What tool would you, or what suggestion or what practice would you say to a listener listening right now is give yourself X amount of time, do X, Y, or Z, and do it this way when you're experiencing X, Y, or Z? Give us a little bit of something that Nick would give to somebody as a working tool that we could use.
Quite literally, in between waking up in the morning and leaving the house to do whatever you're going to do, give yourself even 30 seconds to sit down, tune into what's happening here in my head, what's happening here in my heart, what am I feeling in my body? And while you're doing that, give it the care and the attention and the love that you would if it was a small child. And say to yourself, I've got this. I am good enough. I am worthy. And carry that into your day and come back to that point if you ever feel yourself in stress. Just literally just tune inwards, be present, and be your own champion.
See, 30 seconds isn't a lot to ask. You can do that whilst you're making a coffee first thing in the morning, just, whilst the kettle's boiling or whatever it is. You can just stand there for 2 minutes and just say, this is my time for just to get centered of where I'm at. So brilliant. That I encourage anybody to do, because I've physically felt the benefits, and I'm going to be somebody that just start to practice this on a much more regular basis, because I would say since knowing you, it has been a prompt reminder for me over the last few months as well, since being sat next to you on the radio and listening and what we talk about on a week to week with regards to why we're on the radio. But it's a reminder for me, which I have been doing much more recently, to just take those moments to really get refocused, because it doesn't just rebalance my energy, rebalance my mindset, but it kind of recenters me in a way that brings confidence and clarity in how I am, how I'm existing, and what I'm doing day to day. So just you being you, Nick, is improving me being me. So please continue to keep doing that. So I like to leave the listeners with a final thought. And I have a question for you. And that question is, if the you now was given a piece of advice to the old version of you in the past, what would it be? But you can't change the course of history that's been.
Wow. I think it would be to say it's going to be okay. I think it would be that simple. I think it would be that reassurance that whatever is happening now is leading to something really meaningful and important. Because I can quite honestly say that, I'm pushing 50, and in so many ways, I feel like my life is just beginning in terms of authenticity, in terms of the work that I'm doing. It's really kind of, I feel it in that kind of connected way we've spoken about in this podcast. So I think that so much of the younger versions of me struggled with self-worth, with believing in himself. So I think it would be that.
That's awesome. It is going to be okay, because I think everything that you do day to day, so long as you are focused on benefiting where you currently are in yourself, your health, your mental well-being, everything that encompasses you as an individual, I think so long as you're prepared to keep showing up and doing the work, even when it gets challenging, even when you fall off track, they're the times that you should double down and do it 10 times more and create a more importance around it than what it would be if you're just breezing by and things were good. And, we get complacent in those times. So it will be all right. And I think anybody that is listening that is going through something that is challenging, knowing that you can recenter yourself in such a simple way, taking Nick's advice with regards to how you can do this, taking a 30 seconds, 60 seconds in a morning, just to know where you're at, check in with yourself, do it as regularly as possible. It will give you clarity to move forward, and hopefully you can maybe remove the mask and start showing up as a more authentic version of you on a day-to-day basis. And you'll see that dial of life move forward 10 times faster than what it would be if you were firefighting constantly how you're currently showing up. There we go. Nick, I appreciate it. Thank you for joining me on Impact Your Evolution. This will not be the last time I have you on this podcast, because this has been awesome. Where can people find you just before we disappear?
Yeah, so the best place to find me is on Instagram. So my personal page is Nick Edgar Coaching, or you can find the 3E space, which is the underscore, the number three, the letter E underscore space, both on Insta.
Awesome stuff. Nick, thank you. Appreciate it. I'll see you soon at the radio anyway. But until next time, we'll have another conversation around something that's going to be thought provoking for others. You have a good day. You have an awesome day, and I'll speak to you soon. Take
Yeah,
care.
you too. Thanks a million, Andy. Top man.